Welcome to 5 Dubs by MDDC Press. I'm your host, Rebecca Snyder, the Executive Director of the Maryland, Delaware, and DC Press Association, which represents news media in our region. 5 Dubs focuses on the who, what, when, where, and why of local news media. We'll talk with the journalists about the stories behind the news. You can find more information about our guests in the show notes or on our website, www.5-dubs.com. Welcome, everyone. In the studio today, we have Gabe Roth, who is the Executive Director of Fix the Court. Welcome to the program, Gabe.
Thanks so much for having me, Rebecca.
Well, you are welcome. And I was really interested. We met at Sunshine Fest, which happened in DC a couple weeks ago. And you were on a panel about transparency and access to data. And I was really just intrigued by Fix the Court and sort of your large scale approach to court transparency. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do and what Fix the Court is?
Sure, would be happy to. So I started the organization almost 12 years ago, but I want to go a little bit further back from that. My interest in court transparency actually started 20 years ago when I was a student at the Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern in Chicago, and we had an office downtown that was across the street from a federal building, and each of us in the grad school had a beat that we had to cover during, I think it was the fall quarter, and my beat was the legal beat. And it really pained me to have to put on a suit and walk across the street to hear cases in the Seventh Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals. The Northern District of Illinois is there as well, but that was mostly focused on the Seventh Circuit. And, I was sitting on my computer. It's 2006, right? This is not 1976. Like, why could I not just listen to, whatever was going on there in my headphones as I typed away? And so that was really just the first sort of background in transparency in the courts. And at the same time, I was actually working for something called On the Docket, which was a newsletter that we had that Northwestern had talking about sort of humanizing Supreme Court cases. So I was learning a lot about the Supreme Court, and it takes 6 years on average for a case to go from filing date in the lower courts up to the Supreme Court, and a lot can happen during that time. And then sometimes the facts of the case go back decades. So just learning about the process of the Supreme Court, and also being annoyed with the lack of live audio or even video in the Seventh Circuit. And then, after I worked in television for only about a year, I started working in communications consulting in DC. And it just so happened that a lot of my clients had cases in the federal courts. I had a bunch of individuals that were representing habeas petitioners at Guantanamo. And some of them, probably, should be in prison somewhere, but some of them were like Uyghurs who were, captured by the Chinese and then sent to have, the part of Afghanistan that America was controlling, and they somehow ended up at Guantanamo. So the habeas petitioners there are other folks there. And then, we had same-sex marriage plaintiffs, and
had everybody.
Texas. We had voting rights plaintiffs. So it was just one of these things where I just kept learning about the courts, and when I was doing, writing press releases for these organizations and these coalitions, and eventually it was like, okay, we got to do something more. So I started something called the Coalition for Court Transparency to try to bring cameras to the Supreme Court and to the lower federal courts. At the time, they were doing a pilot program to try to bring. It was a fake pilot program, but they were trying to bring cameras to civil cases in certain federal courts. And the pilot program ran from, I think it was 2011 to 2014. It was in, I don't know, about a dozen federal trial courts across the country. And then they said,
I believe I've used that research. Maryland, every once in a while, debates cameras in the courtroom.
Yes.
And so I always go back to that study because the world didn't end.
Yes.
And that's always the big surprise, hey, transparency is not like destabilizing the court system.
Correct. And the judges that participated were generally sanguine about it, but there just really wasn't enough data, despite the fact that I think they even extended it to a fourth year. Judges, it was sort of self-selecting. Judges that opted in were already sort of sanguine on cameras, and it wasn't just like, okay, everyone's going to do it. and regardless of what I mean, what they should have done, they should have had all civil proceedings video recorded, and then maybe after the fact they could have released a certain percentage of them. But
Mhm.
because it was sort of self-selecting, and it's just certain courtrooms at certain times with certain judges, it was basically designed to fail. I'm not doing a great job explaining why it was designed to fail, but that was sort of the headline that I recall from about a decade ago. Anyway, so that didn't really work great. But as I was doing this work, I realized that it wasn't just this issue of a lack of cameras in courtrooms that
Mhm.
made the third branch of our federal government so antediluvian and antiquated and unaccountable. Right? It's their lack of ethics rules. It's their lack of recusal rules. It's the lack of uh, uh, press releases when they go out and speak in the public, and they often speak before very partisan audiences or at fundraisers, which they really shouldn't be doing. It's the
Mhm.
lack of it's the fact that they don't have term limits where 49 out of 50 states, their apex courts have either a term limit, a mandatory retirement age, or an election that they have to stand for, a retention election. So it wasn't just these, and workplace conduct rules are also very different. There's no Title VII, there's no anti-harassment laws and
Mhm.
anti-discrimination laws and whistleblower protection laws that really apply to the lower courts and the Supreme Court. So um gift rules, I mean, I could keep going, but it was all these things that made the Supreme Court so unaccountable. And so instead of just focusing on the cameras issue, I decided to start focusing sort of writ large on imagine if there were an inspector general for the judiciary. What type of
Mhm.
things would they look at? Imagine if the Congress actually exercised its oversight power over the judiciary. What things would they find? And they do every now and then, but it's very inconsistent, and it's often done on a partisan basis. I mean, I think
Sure.
we've recently learned that in the last few years. It's like Congress only wants, I've said we should have gift rules forever. And, after ProPublica came out with its investigation on Justice Thomas, now it's like, oh, Democrats are saying that the Supreme Court needs gift rules. It's like, no, they're bad gifts that lower court Democratic judges and frankly, or Democratic appointed judges are taking as well. And obviously there's plenty of I mean, each justice has some culpability when it comes to ethics. And it
Mhm.
shouldn't be focused on just one sort of, favorite justice of the left or favorite justice of the right. So anyway, so I started the organization. I've been trying to make it as bipartisan and as nonpartisan as possible, which is not always easy in this in the current environment. And it's been going on fairly, 11 and a half, 12 years. And, we've had, several accomplishments in terms of, changing some laws and changing the way the courts practice. And I think it's been just a generally, a positive thing to have. And, I think obviously the challenge of it now is we're in a bit of an age of retrenchment, in a bit of an age
Right.
of sort of, you know, going the wrong way in transparency in a lot of different parts of our government. I mean, I saw a press release from the Department of Justice um, earlier today. I think it was from last week, talking about, this is the most transparent. The press release said this is the most transparent. They released it in to coincide with Sunshine Week. This is the most transparent Justice Department in history. And it's like, I don't know, bro. Y'all still haven't
Right.
released the Epstein files, but like, you do you, right? Like it was crazy. Like someone posted this on a listserv that I'm in. I was like, is this?
Everybody likes to think that they're the most transparent.
Yeah,
So like you're looking at and I think from a press standpoint,
sure.
we're very focused sometimes on the data, the information, but your purview is much broader in terms of accountability and transparency because you're talking about, you know, uh, ethics and workplace conduct and term limits and things like that.
Yeah,
So you're working on the whole schmear.
I'm
Um,
trying to, or
which
my
is a
staff is
lot.
trying to.
And so I think you had also shared that you had sort of a roadmap or an idea of what changes you thought would be important. And I want to get into that. But I want to also, you've spent a lot of time in this space. Tell me why it matters. Like, I think when changes, when we're trying to and I come at it from the legislative process where you know we're trying to change a rule or change a statute or whatnot, and the judicial system, the courts are very resistant to that change.
Yes.
You're just across the board, and it's really hard to fight against the idea. Well. what, you don't trust the judge, or they're not, the wise person that sits there. But I want to understand, like, why does it matter? What are you seeing when things go wrong, or how people are diminished by this lack of transparency?
Yeah, I mean, I think to me it comes down to power. Especially at the federal level, we have a situation where um, the judges that we have, the justices that we have, hold, I think, far more power than our founders intended. That anyone reading the Constitution would presume. You could look at it from the conservative perspective, saying all these lower court judges are overturning the will of the duly elected president and are hampering his ability to exercise his Article 2 powers. You could look at it from a liberal perspective and saying the Supreme Court is inserting itself into things that uh, it shouldn't, whether it be voting or reproductive rights or environmental protection. Or not inserting itself in things like gerrymandering, which clearly, I not to get too biased here, but I think should be justiciable.
Hmm.
Making up different doctrines, major questions, text and history and tradition that like appear out of whole cloth. And these are just, like I said, just very powerful positions that have only grown in power as we've had some anemic years, if not decades, from Congress. So I think with you want to, the whole point of journalism of nonprofit work in this regard is to hold power to account.
Hmm.
And we want to be sure that when they are exercising this great power, they're not doing it because of a bias or because they're trying to help somebody that gave them a gift or because they want to be seen and cheer led at the annual, liberal law convention or the annual conservative law convention. Um, so I think so in general, yeah, no, I think I'll leave it there. I think that answers the question.
Yeah, well, and I also feel like it's one thing to know, like, oh, this is where Judge Cindy Jones has spoken in the past, and so you kind of know what you're getting into.
Mhm.
But if you don't have any view into that world, you don't know what the biases are. You can't understand. And I think also when you're trying to get court data and running analysis on, well, how do judges rule and what is the effect of, this, that, and the other. Oftentimes at least at the state level, it feels like judges' information is redacted. And so you can't really do large scale analysis as well. Are you seeing that at the federal level, or because it is, and I guess for people who aren't two-parter. So what are you seeing in sort of data issues in terms of transparency? And then can you give us just a little précis on how the federal courts fit into the legal system that sort of your everyday listener might be engaging in? Because I think oftentimes people are just thinking like their local courthouse and
Sure.
not necessarily understanding the dichotomy.
Sure. So in terms of the data and what's being hidden, I think from the federal perspective, one of the big challenges that we have is with the case management and electronic case filing systems, which is called CMECF, and the way that you or I or even members of the Department of Justice and congressional staff get documents that are filed in CMECF is through Pacer. And there are about 1 billion documents that have been filed in that system electronically. And there's a paywall. It's been called the biggest paywall in the world. Americans spend $150 million a year on average accessing documents in the federal system through Pacer. It's only 10 cents a page, as most people know, but that adds up very quickly because lawyers are verbose.
Mhm.
And there are some cases where, if you wanted to read every document and every page in the case, it would cost you as much as purchasing a nice car. So I think when it comes to data and all the things, the advances in data that can take place through AI and through other, um, sort of data mining and research tools, having that paywall. And yes, there are ways around the paywall. You can get a subscription to LexisNexis, and they have their own AI thing. And is it good?
And
I
that's
don't know.
still
They send me
paywall.
emails every day, but thankfully it goes to spam. Like, it's just one of those things where, I think data should be democratized, and everyone who wants access to it should be looking at it from their own perspectives, and to get to sort of, obviously not fudging it, but to get what they need from it. And it's just very hard to do if, you are sort of reliant on a big budget or a third party that you're going to have to pay money to
Hmm.
access. It is our data. It is public data. There are ways to redact it too. Look, I mean, there are problems with the current system where, you know, uh, I think, I don't know what agency it was. It might have been the Federal Judicial Center or someone else found, hundreds of unredacted social security numbers, or hundreds of unredacted, home addresses or something like that. They're tools to do that,
Hmm.
that the judiciary is working on. But that shouldn't be a reason not to democratize it. And in terms of finding the money, I mean, there's ways to make up the money. There's proposals. I'm working on one right now with folks on Capitol Hill to make up the money. I mean, the Congress could also just appropriate the funds to do it. It doesn't cost $150 million to run a bunch of HTML and PDFs. Even if there's a billion of them, it just doesn't cost that much money to do it each year. But if they insist, there's ways to make up the money. So I think that just sort of, from a basic level, is just a really, and again, look, people who came up with Pacer came up with it in 1988. Like, back then, it was a
Oh, it was state of
revolutionary
the art,
idea.
I'm sure.
But it's obviously very not that in 2026. In terms of it just interacting with the federal courts, I think that, you're right. Most of us don't interact with them. Most of us have not filed lawsuits in the federal. I mean, I've only filed a few myself, and not on my behalf, but on Fix the Court's behalf. I'm not a lawyer, so I didn't file them. An attorney that we work with filed for us. But um, in terms of the way that people interact with the federal courts, it's sort of, I want to sort of take it from the top down. So, obviously the Supreme Court, they only hear 60 cases a year. But, recently, with the increased use of the shadow docket, or the emergency docket, where, the Trump administration is losing in the lower courts, and they say, oh, it's an emergency, we have to go to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court is typically, I think, in 88% of the cases, upholding the Trump administration policy. I mean, these are major policies that have real effects, even if they're temporary, right? I mean, we can get to the merits docket in a second, but on the emergency docket, we're talking about whether or not people can stay in the United States,
Hmm.
who may have an asylum claim. I mean, my wife moved to this country, in the 90s, in part. I mean, she won the lottery, the immigration lottery, but it started out as an asylum claim, back from her home country. And so, you know, so immigration is obviously a big thing, because that can, has a major
A material
impact. I
effect,
think,
yeah.
funding the federal government also has a major impact. I mean, you're in Baltimore, I'm in Northern Virginia. A lot of people in this area work for the federal government, and just on my street, have you know every week, it's like, are you at the Voice of America still have a job? Do you at the State Department still have a job? What
Right.
about you at the office of one of the national security offices that I can't talk about? Like, I just, who has a job and who doesn't? That impacts, just the mental health of my neighbors. Uh, Affects the tax base. I mean, it's not cheap to live in Northern Virginia, that's for sure. So the fact that the Supreme Court is sort of inserting itself in a lot of these cases when the issue hasn't percolated below is a major deal. I think, they
Hmm.
can, the examples, the major cases in terms of, like, the abortion cases and the voting cases, those really are few and far between. Though there is a major voting case that was, it's going to potentially be the death knell to the end of the Voting Rights Act, that was argued earlier, that were actually re-argued last year, and it'll be decided between now and the end of June. But so that's sort of like the Supreme Court is these major national issues. In the more local sense, I mean, a lot of it obviously has to do with crime, with federal crime, with
Hmm.
there are not a lot of federal crimes. Most crimes are obviously, state crimes. But there are, especially especially in the DC area, when it comes, dealing with the federal government, there are issues of, I mentioned it earlier, but Title VII discrimination, employment discrimination is very commonly filed as a federal claim. Harassment and retaliation are often filed as federal claims. So some those sorts of employment disputes. Um, there are gun crimes, anything that happens across state lines, obviously, is a federal crime. And
Mhm.
to me, like, yes, there are certain sensitivities, obviously, dealing with crime and with victims, but to the extent possible, I think that access to what's going on in your community, whether it be on a state or a local basis, which you can learn through the docket of your court, should be open to the public. And if a name needs to be redacted, redact the name, and we can have a fight over whether or not the name should be redacted. But overall, I think that we pay for the courts, and we should see the fruits of their labor.
Well, and what you said about, the emergency docket, it just really strikes me that, they're setting policy, they're setting, without any of that kind of bubbling up from the grassroots or coming to sort of fight through the courts. It's just kind of top over, bypassing everything else, and then everybody has to live with that decision because there's no one over the Supreme Court.
Yeah, and
And
look, there is something called, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
oh,
off
go
there.
for it.
No, there is something called judicial override, where Congress, the Supreme Court says, "Hey, X isn't working out," and Congress goes back and rewrites the law. It's more difficult in the constitutional context, obviously, but from a statutory perspective, that used to happen all the time. It used to happen like once a month. Now it happens like maybe once a Congress.
Mhm,
So when the judicial, given all everything that we learned in civics class about the three branches and checks and balances, like Congress does have a role if the Supreme Court's out of bounds, or I mean, goodness knows that if to the extent that the Trump administration follows the Supreme Court, if they deem policy unconstitutional, the Trump administration is going to try again, right? I mean, I think they
right.
tried with the so-called Muslim ban in 2017, like three different times before they quote unquote got it right, but or the Supreme Court permitted it to go through. So the fact that Congress isn't stepping in and saying, oh well, if you're redoing like there's a lot of cases about the First Step Act at the Supreme Court that's trying to well, it used to be bipartisan, now maybe not so much, but it was this effort to sort of have compassionate release, or just having equal sentencing for certain different drug crimes,
Mhm,
and the law is complicated and it's a bit vague in parts, and so instead of Congress rewriting the law, it just sort of sits there, and the Supreme Court is the final word. When I think, if we're talking about things like sentencing, that's like really one of the basic things that Congress is supposed to do.
mhm. Right, yeah, one would think that, there should be more interplay between the
Right.
2. And so, a lot of the sort of the big ticket items or like the wide items or workplace conduct, gun crimes, interstate. So that really just I think sets the tone for a lot of the states are often wanting to conform to federal law. They want to make sure that it's all in sync. So you have a vision, you have a roadmap of what you think the ideal or the most transparent judiciary would look like. What are the elements of those?
Sure. So yeah, thank you for asking. I think, and we do fix the court. My organization does do some work on the state level. I think one of the things that we've done recently that's been interesting is sort of assess the financial disclosure rules for
Mhm,
state judges. We focus mostly on the Supreme Court. Generally, the disclosures that a state Supreme Court justice has to file every year is the same that a lower court municipal judge. They're pretty similar, if not the same, in most states. In Delaware, for example, you have to file a FOIA request to receive it. It's not just like automatically
I'm
online.
interested.
Um,
Well, and that's always the push-pull. I mean, there's, in the open data movement, like, what should just be totally available online? And then
yes.
what kind of rigmarole do you have to go through? Like, what request do you have to file to get it?
Yeah.
Which, often and we could wax poetic for a long time about the state of FOIA and how difficult it is to get
Yes.
information, even obvious information that everyone agrees should be FOIA-able is sometimes, withheld.
Well, what's so yeah, like it's funny because we talk about FOIA and should FOIA apply to the judiciary, and we can talk about that. But I was just looking at my chart here, knowing that y'all work in Maryland, DC, and Delaware, and I was like, oh yeah, when I had to when I've done this, I think we've done this the last 2 years, or I guess 3 years. We did it, 23, 24, 25. I had to actually file what is, essentially effectively a FOIA request with the state of Delaware to get,
And
and they
have
sent it to
you
me right away. Like it took less than a day, I think, in the last, in the most recent instance. I received the report 90 minutes after filing the FOIA with
You're
the Delaware
actually a
Public
lucky
Defender.
duck, friend, because so Delaware's FOIA, a citizen of the state of Delaware, like they want to know that you're a resident. We've
Mm,
had issues from reporters who an out-of-state reporter can't get their FOIA recognized, and they
yep,
have to, find someone in the state to file the request, which is totally nuts in many
totally nuts.
respects.
We do that too. Yes, we have. I think I got a guy in Alabama, a guy in Missouri. It's
I'm
been
glad you have
weird.
a guy.
Been weird. But yeah, we've definitely, yeah, and obviously in 2026, I mean, it didn't make any sense when the law was created, but yes, it's just a restriction that makes no sense since every story used to be local. Now every story is national, and reporters obviously can live wherever, and everyone works remotely. And information that is interesting to somebody in Delaware will be interesting to somebody in Maryland or possibly California. So, yeah, those restrictions are always seem to me kind of silly.
Yeah.
But
Okay,
yeah,
so
in
but
terms of
before we
other,
go off
no,
on a
sorry, go ahead.
total tangent, so one of your first elements of the big plan is judicial disclosure.
Yes, yeah, we
Okay.
got to know more about the judges and justices that are, ruling over us. To basic things like conflicts of interest, real estate holdings, spousal employment, any gifts they've received in the last year, any reimbursements they've received. There's even one line in the Hawaii disclosure that we really love that we're hoping to get other states to adopt, which is how many hours of continuing judicial education and ethics education have you received in the last
Mm,
year? You just check a box that you've done the 3 or whatever it is that you're required to do, and no other state requires that in their disclosure. I mean, some other states require CJE and CLE, but, like, this is really great that it's actually, in the disclosure. And also, liabilities is also, we got to be sure your debts are not, insane, that you could be potentially beholden to someone in your judicial opinion. So I think judicial, financial disclosure, the first the federal financial disclosure law passed as part of the post Watergate laws in the late 70s. And so, all 48, hopefully it will be 49 as soon as tomorrow, because Utah is considering, they passed a law, but Governor
oh,
Cox
good.
hasn't signed the bill yet. So 48 or 49, depending on when this airs, states have judicial financial disclosure laws. Idaho's the only one that doesn't have laws. And it gets a little complicated because sometimes there's a separate disclosure that you have to file when you run during your retention election.
Sure.
So, but
Is
there
there
should
a
be an
s-
annual disclosure for all judges and justices.
is there a state that does it right? Like, do you have a gold star state?
Yeah. So if I'm looking at my point totals from this past year, number one are California and Colorado, and
Okay.
then followed by Arkansas, Arizona, and Massachusetts. So none of the states in the in the viewing area, so to speak, get high marks. I guess West Virginia is the closest one, but yeah, we have Delaware ranked 21st. Maryland is ranked 30th,
Oh,
and
wow.
DC we didn't do, but we'll do it if we do it again next year. But they would be, if we ranked them, they would be tied for 23rd. So,
What
to
about
me, it's just,
Virginia, your hometown state?
oh, Virginia's a little better. They're 11th.
Okay.
Um,
All right.
but
So they've
but
been
but
listening to you.
yeah, I mean, for us, it's like just put the thing online, right? Like make your judges do it and then post them online. Like there should not be, if you're saying, oh, there's personally identifiable information in the disclosures, then you're doing the disclosures wrong. Like 3 states actually require a home address in the disclosure, which is insane. I mean, thankfully, most of the judges actually just put the address of their courts, but like 3 states, and I won't call them out right now because I don't want, to endanger anybody, but like 3 states require a home address. And it's like, you don't want the judges' home addresses, right? I mean, that's one of the bigger things that we've been doing in the past year, is sort of figuring out ways to balance transparency and security. And one of the things that we believe is, like, if you're a judge, you have every right to try to get your home address, your
Right. Well,
spouse's
Maryland had that judge killed.
exactly,
Or
exactly.
so I mean, there are significant security issues, and it's always a balance between privacy, security, and openness. And I do feel like you can thread the needle. So judicial disclosure is one kind of chunk of that
Yes.
platform. What's another one that you're working on?
Banning gifts. So banning the
Okay.
acceptance of gifts. So currently Congress has a gift ban, and there's some loopholes. They're not, huge, but there are some loopholes like um but generally it's like up to $50. And the reason it's $50 is like if someone buys you a Big Mac or a coffee in the
Right.
Starbucks line, we don't need to make a federal case out of it. So that's how they just arrived at 50, which is
So is there really a lot of pushback? I mean, it just seems to me like that's something we could all get behind. Like judges should not
yeah,
be, it's one thing to be like, here's a book that we want you to have, or here's the tote
yeah,
bag,
sure.
fine, who cares? But, here's the lavish dinner and tickets to, the concert kind of thing, or here's the hunting trip or whatnot. That doesn't seem like such a big ask.
No.
Is there a lot of pushback when you look to change those laws?
Yeah, because because
And
everyone
why?
just goes back to their partisan corners, right?
Okay.
I don't think I'm speaking too out of turn, but like when I was working on this, the bill was called, I think, like the Judicial Gift Ban Act. And then at the last minute, it was changed to like the High Court Gift Ban Act. And like, no, it's like, yes, we are all familiar with gifts that the Supreme Court justices, all of them, frankly, not just, Thomas, have received in the last couple decades. Like that's been written about ad nauseum at this point. But, and I have a running list of, 200 gifts that lower court judges have reported getting, right? These are not even like ones that they like are, too not embarrassed, but like too shady to not put in their disclosures. These are like ones that they've actually written into their disclosures. And they're crazy. I mean, some of them are like, lawyers that work or litigants. Manny on my staff found one today where like the University of South Carolina gave a judge like a $900 gift, and then that judge didn't recuse in a case that involved the University of South Carolina. And like
That's so
maybe
cool.
okay, it was the basketball team that gave the judge the gift, and it wasn't but like it's the same institution, And so
Mhm.
to me, it's less about what the Supreme Court does in the gifts, because I think once Justice Thomas is 77 years old. He's not going to be on the court forever. Once he retires, a significant portion of that gift issue disappears. I'm more concerned about the lower court judges who, one, are sort of taking their marching orders from the Supreme Court, who are, accepting all these gifts. I mean, Justice Ginsburg's accepted $1 million prize, and she says she donated it. And I've heard from people that have accepted some of those donations, but like you shouldn't be accepting it to begin with,
Right.
donating or not. Like there's a rule that says you shouldn't, even if you want to accept a gift, the max for accepting a gift of that will be donated is $2,000. So obviously $1 million. So yeah. So I think to me it's ensuring that the lower courts have strong rules, and certain Democrats wanted to make it a SCOTUS thing, and I get that, but like that's and then once Democrats make it a SCOTUS thing, then the Republicans push back. So that's really
Right.
been the challenge, is sort of seeing it through partisan lenses.
Well, and that
'Cause
creates
it's
so many challenges with any type of reform work because it gets very political. This should be the court should belong to everyone. It should be a nonpartisan issue, but nothing ever seems to really be
correct.
all that nonpartisan. Okay. So you got
Correct.
banning gifts, judicial disclosure. What's next on the hit parade?
Well, we have, more to regarding, work that reporters do on a daily basis. We were thinking about FOIA for the judiciary.
Mhm.
Well, first of all, we have a free pacer bill that we're working on with House and Senate Democrats, House and Senate Democrats, House and Senate Republicans. So we got all four corners there. That's being worked on. But specifically, uh, with Freedom of Information Act, we thought about a FOIA for the judiciary. So this is really something that this guy Mike Listener from the Free Law Project is a friend of ours. He started something called Recap or Court Listener, where basically is if I download something from Pacer and I have the browser extension and I pay for the document, the 80 cents for the 8-page document, then and if and I have the browser extension, that document is automatically saved on his website, Recap the Law or courtlistener.com. And so you can get that document for free. So long as one person anywhere in the world reads the document and pays the 80 cents, the $3 or whatever it is, then everybody else gets it for free. So he started that. And one of his big policy proposals was FOIA for the judiciary. So we talked about it, and eventually there was a member of Congress. Now he's in the Senate. He was in the House, Adam Schiff, that introduced a judiciary FOIA bill. But we realized that FOIA is not great. FOIA is not designed in 2026 to actually get you documents. It is just designed to really frustrate you, and it could be abused. I mean, there are people that there are groups that have filed tens of thousands of FOIAs and have really slowed down the process, and they have done it in a way that I don't think is very helpful. I think they're just doing it to slow down the process. I mean, there's this one guy, I can picture him. I don't remember his name or his group, but like, I think he's really just trying to slow stuff down. I think his name is Mike. Anyway,
It's grinding through the process.
Yeah. So our thought is, instead of applying FOIA to the judiciary, which again, it might be hard because we don't want I don't necessarily want judges' emails. I mean, it might be interesting, but I think that there's obviously a segregable part of those emails should be private. We thought of something called the Judicial Open Records Act, which what are the sort of like the dozen categories of things that we could be pushing the judiciary or requiring the judiciary to publish on their own, right? So we don't have really great data about certain misconduct investigations. We don't have the entire guide to judiciary policy, which is being cited in judicial opinions, but like they've made some of it public, but most of it is not. We don't have great data on the contracts that the judiciary has with third parties. Every now and then it'll appear on, there's this website, sam.gov, or it'll, someone will put out a press release. But like once, the judiciary gave a $300 million contract to General Dynamics, and Mike and I from Court Listener reported on it, and then they took the press release off the internet because they didn't want to be in the spotlight. It was like, okay, cool. That happens a lot. I feel like it was 2 or 3 times today. It was like somebody found something about it the justices did, and like, here's the link, and then I click the link and it no longer exists. But anyway,
you have to jump on that right away.
Yeah, right. I need to. Thank goodness for the Internet Archive and screenshots. But anyway, to me, I think it'd be really helpful to know. The judiciary, $9 billion is not a lot of money compared to the rest, but it's still a lot of money.
That's
That's especially if it's not being spent well. I think specifically in the free Pacer context, the judiciary is all about now that they've been hacked 16 times. Oh yeah, we might fix Pacer, we might fix the NECF. Great, but you don't need to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to do it. And I'm worried, without oversight, without an inspector general, without a real accounting of their contracts. I mean, they say they have internal audits, but like who's doing
but if you can't see the reports of the internal auditors, or that's not public, I mean, how deep is that oversight?
Exactly.
Before we get on to the next one, I kind of wanted to just raise up Court Listener a minute, because we do talk to a lot of journalists, and we have a lot of journalists, so I wanted to share. So courtlistener.com/recap, which you shared, is Pacer spelled backwards, which I think is brilliant. That's how you can install the extensions for Pacer. It looks like it's Firefox, Chrome, and Safari, and do some searches. So is there anything else for a journalist listening in that you want to share about Recap or Court Listener? I know it's not your organization, but you're here.
They also have financial disclosures from the federal courts up through 2020. And then Mike and I and Project on Government Oversight were able to help Congress pass a law in 2021. I think it was signed in 2022, where all of the financial disclosures of federal court judges and justices, all 2,400 of them, now have to be put on the internet. So there's a website. I mean, you can just Google federal judges financial disclosures, and the website will come up. It's like pub.jeffs.uscourts.gov. But so you can get the financial disclosures that way. And only half of the states, actually less, I think 23 of the 50 states require financial disclosures to be online, and some states actually have 2 financial disclosures that state court judges are required. There's like the regular one that has like financial information and spousal work and debts and such. And then there's a second one, which is like a gifts and reimbursement and travel report. So some of those are online where the first ones are not, or sometimes the first ones, vice versa, whatever. So, so Mike has a lot of the older financial disclosures, and then the newer ones are posted on the internet because we passed a law.
Got it. All right. Good work. All right. Earlier, you talked about the role of the inspector general, because I kind of feel like that should be one. If I hope that's one of your
It is, but again, it's become partisan, right? So there's
100%.
an inspector general. The Inspector General Act was introduced 25 years ago by Chuck Grassley as sort of this backdoor way to try to break up the then uber liberal Ninth Circuit. Now it's like,
Mhm.
60-40 liberal. As then it was like 90-10. And so, it's a great bill. We supported it and don't really have an opinion on breaking up the Ninth Circuit. If they want to break it up, great. If not, whatever. And so more recently, though, it's been introduced by Democrats as a way to sort of needle the Supreme Court. Um, because the Supreme Court doesn't have an inspector general. And if it did, maybe it would investigate some of the lavish trips that the justices are going on. So again,
Mhm.
it's like, the Democrats didn't want to break up the Ninth Circuit 25 years ago. The Republicans don't want to needle the justices on their gifts because there's obviously, 6-3 conservative uh, at the court. So, where are we going to come together in the middle? Our currently we're working with uh, House and Senate, no, House Republicans and House Democrats on considering whether or not there should be an inspector general just for the administrative office of the U.S. courts.
Mhm.
So they're the ones doing the audits. They're sort of running the ship, running the show. I mean, there is the judicial conference, which is the policy-making body of the judiciary, but all the staff of the judicial conference, all the work that's done by the judicial conference is really done by the men and women who work in the administrative office of the U.S. courts. And they do everything from, you know, building leases with GSA for where the courthouses are and their staff to help handle misconduct investigations, to doing some of those never made public audits and handling financial services for the branch. So I think an inspector general for that segment should be a sort of a nonpartisan way, and that's sort of what we're focusing on right now, trying to get
Okay.
that.
And then what else is, so we've got 4 pillars here. Is there another
Oh, there's a
one up
million
your sleeve?
pillars. I mean, I could talk all. We got, like, we're trying to rewrite the judicial misconduct rules. That was earlier today. We're trying to help people file complaints against judges because it's very confusing, and the websites are all very, it says on the websites like almost all misconduct complaints are dismissed. It's like, okay, maybe that's true, but like, don't say that on
Wow,
the
what a thing
website.
to put on the
Why are you
website where you're
discouraging?
filing your issue. Be like,
Yeah, it's very
"It's all
discouraging.
specious, don't worry about it."
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we were the group that I think got the first ever term limits bill introduced. We believe that Congress can pass a law to end life tenure at the Supreme Court by transferring new, justices appointed after the law is passed to senior status after 18 years. So
Mm,
they'd be, judges, they'd be justices of the Supreme Court. They wouldn't be hearing cases after those 18 years, but they'd get their full salary, they'd get their office, they'd have a judicial commission. So we don't think that runs afoul of Article 3 of the Constitution. So prospective 18-year term limits is a big thing that we've, been pushing, and there are bills in Congress that would do it. There are other bills in Congress that would have the 18 years start right away. So a new justice would be added, and then the most senior justice would stop hearing cases. I don't find that constitutional. And again, think it's
mm,
a way to needle, you know, Justice Thomas, Roberts, and
right.
Alito, who are conservative and are the 3 most senior justices. So, our way would just apply it prospectively. And so there's a bill that's been introduced. Again, it's hard to get bipartisan support on that. I mean, term limits have always been a sort of a hobby horse, or been championed by the right, but in this context, it is not. It is only Democrats that are supportive of that bill. So I think in general, if term limits are good enough, or mandatory retirement age, or there's
Mhm.
retention elections too, but like if limiting the length of tenure of apex courts works in almost every U.S. state and pretty much every modern democracy, it should work for the U.S. Supreme Court. But
You would think.
I don't see that happening anytime in the immediate future. But hopefully down the line, we've planted a seed.
Well, and so I wanted to then turn to, unless there's one other, space in the roster that you wanted to
No,
share.
we're good.
Okay, because I feel like that you're working on a lot for a small
Yes.
organization. I wanted to
Yes.
talk about how you're making change. So, we started off talking about how Congress does, in your mind and in legally, they do have the ability to affect what's happening in the judicial system. But like on a practical level, that doesn't seem like a very sexy topic. Like, are you how are you able to like dig in a sclerotic Congress to make those things happen, or are you starting to turn to the states?
That's the big question, right? That's the $1 million question. I think you can't ignore Congress,
Mhm,
and I think that contrary to most groups in this space, you can't ignore Republicans in Congress. I think to many other groups' peril, you know, my political leanings are probably not are probably pretty obvious. But I also think growing up, you know, in purple Tennessee, because at least it was back then when I was growing up in the '90s. I think it's important to talk to both sides of the aisle, and there are
mhm,
people that are going to, especially at the staff level, gonna see eye to eye with you, even if they're, you know, former Trump White House staffers or, you know, organizers for AOC on the left. Like there I think there's ways to find common ground with just about anyone. And so I haven't given up on Congress. I know a lot of people have.
mhm,
I think, the power of the purse is a very interesting and important incentive. And I think that, both Republicans and Democrats have sort of, nothing has passed yet, but for the first time, and I've been pleased to see this, trying to use the power of the purse to affect change in the judiciary. So saying, okay, we're going to take away $10 million of your non-security funding, Supreme Court, if you don't pass an enforceable ethics regimen,
mhm,
or we're gonna we're gonna stop funding law clerks in the DC districts if Chief Judge Boasberg doesn't do XYZ. So I don't want it necessarily to be punitive. I think maybe in the Boasberg context it was a little bit, and again neither of these passed. But I think that just from a sort of day-to-day basis, like, and also you don't need a law. The other thing too is you don't need laws to be passed. um you know
'Cause some of these are practices, like
yeah,
the judiciary could say, "All right, well, let's publish our policy manuals."
exactly.
But
They're all
they
these
could do that.
100%. Exactly. So it doesn't need to be a law, right? Since Fix the Court started, we've gotten one law signed by one president, right? But we've affected other changes through advocacy, through working with congressional staff to push the justices or to push the lower courts to open up to live. I mean, live streaming was a big thing, right? I mean, we went
Mhm,
circuit by circuit and said, there's 13 of them. Said, hey, we got Merrick Garland when he was chief judge of the DC circuit to live stream arguments for the first time there. And then I mean, the Ninth Circuit had been doing it for a while that predated us, but and then went to the Second Circuit and the Fourth Circuit, and someone had to do that. I mean, I
right.
think they probably would have done it with COVID, but the fact we're updating it. We have a list that we update every month. Are you live streaming? Are you know, and we in the lower courts too, especially now with all these, is not all 650 of the Trump related cases, but a certain percentage of them. We're emailing the judges, we're emailing the clerks and the staff saying, hey, there's this big hearing coming up. Is there a call-in number for the press and for the public? If there's a call-in number for the press, can you open it up to the public?
Mhm,
Can you do a live stream on YouTube? On YouTube. So I think that yeah, we haven't given up on Congress, and there's ways to work with Congress that don't require laws. On the state court issue, we sort of pick and choose our battles. We have a very small staff. It's me and three other people that are working, and those three other people are working part-time. I'd love to expand that. But the funding hasn't been there because
right.
apparently I piss off people on the left and the right.
At
And
least you're equal
foundations are
opportunity.
becoming more partisan these days.
Mhm,
But I think overall, there are opportunities to work with state courts when they present themselves. I mean, Michigan was, redoing their financial disclosure rules, so I testified before the Michigan Supreme Court. California is redoing some of their judicial ethics rules, so Manny, my staff, wrote to them saying, okay, this is great, but have you considered A through G as
mhm,
well? Utah is going to potentially add a financial disclosure requirement for their judges, making them the 49th state to do that. Idaho being the only one not to. And we worked with the guy that wrote the bill to be sure to help track it as it went through the state house and the state senate. So I think when it comes to sort of the more nuts and bolts thing in terms of figuring out ways to ensure that uh, reporters in the states have access to court records, that's a huge challenge. I mean, I think Pacer is great in the sense it's actually like several hundred systems because each court really has their own Pacer, but theoretically, at least there's one login. In the states, it's harder. There are definitely counties that are doing their own thing. There's municipal courts that are doing their own thing. And so, with the state court record system, I know Utah put in a recent bill, we're gonna set aside $7.5 million to do a online state court record system. You might need more than that.
Right.
I didn't
Well,
say
and it's
anything, but it's definitely a big challenge to sort of, you want to have that access and you want to be able to have it online. But yeah, as we learned from the Sunshine Week event, a lot the reporter in Louisiana, she had to go to the court. And even when she went to the court, they sometimes wouldn't give her the records. So
right.
I think that is, remains a huge challenge for, especially at a time where local news is obviously sadly being diminished. I would love to, if Fix the Court had more funding, I think trying to, hire some staff and do some more research on sort of the state of records access and case filing access state by state would definitely be something that we'd be interested in doing, and trying to find ways, the way that we've, pushed the federal judiciary to, they're not there yet, but they're definitely in a better posture than they were before we started, using some of those strategies to try to push the state court administrators to open up their records, at least, to the press, if not also to the public, I think would be something we'd love to work on.
Well, and I feel like there's a whole host of things to work on, and I really appreciate that you kind of are knitting together these best practices and have the ability to help the different systems learn from one another, with an eye and a lens for transparency. So I can't wait to hear more about what Fix the Court does. We'll have to stay in touch because I think a lot of the things that you've brought up really could be applicable in the state level. And we'll look to see how we can work together on this. But thank you so
Yeah,
much for coming to talk with us. This was great.
my pleasure. Thanks again.
Thanks for listening to 5 Dubs with Rebecca Snyder. Please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review wherever you download your podcasts so that others can find us. What do you want to know about local journalism? Email me at rsnyder, SNYDER, at mddcpress.com. Interested in supporting our podcast and journalism? Please donate to our 501c3 Press Foundation. Find out more and see the full episode list and show notes at www.5-dubs.com.